Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads. Today we're going to start the next Addy story. Addy Learns a Lesson. Chapter 1, A New Home. Addy Walker and her mother stood on a busy pier in Philadelphia one hot afternoon at the end of August. Addy's boots pinched her toes and trickles of sweat ran down her back. She took Mama's hand and looked around nervously. "We finally here," she thought. "Mama and me in Philadelphia. We're gonna start our new life here. This is where Papa say freedom is." The pier was a noisy place. Huge crates hung from ropes overhead. They swung by clumsily as they were unloaded from ships. Addy cringed, thinking one of the ropes might break and the crate would come crashing down on her and Mama. A fishing boat had dumped its catch from the pier. Some of the fish were still alive. Addy saw their mouths moving as if they were still sucking for air. Addy felt the way the fish looked, as though she couldn't breathe in the dirty yellow-gray air that smelled like burning fires. Addy never seen so many people in her life. It seemed as if everyone in Philadelphia must be on the pier. Some people bent over the weight of heavy trunks. Others had nothing. Some people stood quietly, looking lost. Others shouted out to people who were meeting them. "I wish Sam and Papa was here," Addy said. She saw a small girl being swept up in a man's strong arms. "Addy, we by ourselves," Mama replied. "I know, but wouldn't it be something if we was to turn around and they was here just like magic?" Addy said. "It would be something," Mama sighed. "I wish I knew where they was." Addy heard sadness in Mama's voice. Papa and Addy's brother Sam had been sold off Master Stevens's plantation a few weeks before. Now Papa and Sam were probably slaves on another plantation, unless they had been able to escape. Mama and Addy had to leave baby Esther behind when they ran away from Master Stevens's plantation. Esther was too young to make the dangerous escape through the woods with Addy and Mama. Her crying would have given them away. Addy and Mama spent their days hiding in the woods and traveling only at night when no one would see them. They finally made it across North Carolina to a hot, crowded boat that took them to Philadelphia. The boat had arrived just minutes before. Addy felt lost in a sea of passengers. "Mama, you think we should be waiting someplace else?" Addy asked. "The boat captain said to wait here," Mama said. "Somebody gonna come for us." "Maybe we should ask somebody what them signs say," Addy suggested as she looked at signs around the pier. "We ain't gonna do that," Mama said with fear in her voice. "We in a big city now. We can't be trusting strangers." "I wish I could read," Addy thought. "Then I could help." But she did not know one letter. As she shifted back and forth on her aching feet, Addy began to worry. Maybe no one will come. What if we find our way around the city by ourselves? Where are we going to go? Addy's heart started to race, but she tried to keep her face looking calm. She didn't want to worry Mama. Nearly a half an hour passed. The crowd had thinned out when Addy saw a woman and a girl coming towards them. Addy kept her eye on the girl. She was about Addy's size. She skipped ahead of the woman and waved to Addy as if she were a long-lost friend. As she came closer, Addy saw a sunny smile on her face. "I'm sorry we late," said the woman, who was tall and heavy-set. She reached out to hug Mama, then Addy. "I was told you was coming on the Livy, which was way down on Pier 35. Come to find out you're on the Liberty here on Pier 3. I'm Mabel Moore, and this is my girl, Sarah." Sarah reached out and shook Addy's hand. "It's good to meet you," she said. Up close, her smile was even brighter. Mrs. Moore went on. "We from the Freedom Society of Trinity AME Church, and we're going to find to take you to the church about getting you settled." "We grateful," Mama said. "I'm Ruth Walker, and this is my girl, Addy." "Well, come with us," Mrs. Moore said. As they fell and stepped behind their mothers, Addy looked shyly at Sarah. Sarah's brown skin was the same color as Addy's. Her hair was short as a boy's, and her faded dress reminded Addy of the shift she had worn back on the plantation. Sarah's big dark eyes were so bright Addy could see herself in them when Sarah turned to her and asked, "Where'd you and your mama come from?" "North Carolina," Addy answered. "We was slaves on the plantation." "My family come from Virginia. We was slaves too," Sarah said. "My teacher, Miss Dunn, from North Carolina. Her family was slaves too." "They got colored people up here teaching school?" Addy asked. She could hardly believe it. Back on the plantation, she didn't know colored people who could even read. "They sure do," Sarah said. "Miss Dunn went to college and everything." "You gotta be smart to do that." Sarah looked at Addy. "You's come to school, ain't you?" "Mama said I could go," Addy answered. "That's good," said Sarah. "We learn to read and write. We have spelling matches, learn our sums and everything. We even study the war. You're gonna like school. You'll see." Just then they came to a busy corner. Sarah took Addy's hand. "I don't want you getting lost on your first day," she said. Addy was glad to hold Sarah's hand. She hardly knew where to look as they walked down the crowded, narrow streets. She stared at the carts piled high with fruits and vegetables, heaps of coal and bundles of rags. She looked up at the horse-drawn carriages and wagons that sped past them. She looked down so that she wouldn't step into garbage and horse droppings. She stared at all the people, black and white, old and young. Many of them wore fine clothes. Sarah pointed to a street sign. "You see that sign there?" she said. She asked Addy. "It tell you where you at. We on 2nd Street now. When I come up here, I got lost loads of times before I could because I couldn't read." "Wish I could read," Addy mumbled. "Not reading is nothing to be ashamed about," Sarah said, giving Addy's hand a reassuring squeeze. "Miss Dunn will teach you to read. She taught me, and I can help you too." Addy smiled at Sarah. "I'd like that," she said. "I'm going to help you, I promise," Sarah said, smiling her sunny smile. When they arrived outside the church, Addy was amazed at how big it was. And when they went inside, she could hardly believe her eyes. Addy had never seen such a huge place before. She stood in the middle of the center aisle and slowly turned around. "That's the pipe organ," Sarah said, pointing to the back of the church. "It make real pretty music. The choir sit up there with it. And look, there's the front of the church. That's the pulpit for the pastor." "What's that written all over it?" Addy asked. "It says, 'Peace within thy walls,'" Sarah read. Mrs. Moore led Addy, Mom, and Sarah down to the basement of the church and to a large meeting half filled with people. The candles on the wall sconces gave the room a warm glow. Long tables were covered with platters of fried chicken, greens, biscuits, pies, and cakes. Addy had seen food like this only once before, long ago, when Master Stevens had a grand party. Sarah whispered to Addy that most of the people in the chair were church members she knew, but some were slaves who had just arrived from the South. They were new, like Mama and Addy. By the time Addy and Mama sat down to eat, it seemed like they had been hugged by everyone in the room. Addy felt like they were being welcomed into a big family. While they were eating, Mrs. Moore asked, "What kind of work can you do?" "I can sew some," Mama said. "Back on the plantation, I did mostly mending, but sometimes I made shirts and things like that." Mrs. Moore's face brightened. "I know where the place is to find work. There's a woman on South Street named Mrs. Ford. She a white woman. She got a small dress shop. She can be fussy, but she pay good, and I think she got a room for you and Addy to stay in." After the meal, Mrs. Moore left Sarah at the church while she took Addy and Mama to the dress shop a few blocks away. The tiny shop was crammed with cloth, thread, ribbon, yarn, feathers, and boxes. A woman sat near the back, bent over her sewing. She looked up when they arrived. "Good day, Mrs. Ford," Mrs. Moore said. The 3 visitors barely fit inside the shop. Mrs. Moore introduced Addy and Mama and said, "I think Ruth Walker would make a fine seamstress for you." "I'll be the judge of that," Mrs. Moore snapped, bending over to look at the top of her spectacles. "You know, Mrs. Moore, the last girl you brought here got married and left me soon after she started. I'm an abolitionist and I want to help you colored people, but I have a business to run and I can't take many chances. Mama, a really good sewer, Addy said bravely, and we ain't gonna take off. Mama squeezed Addy's arm and Addy fell silent. Mrs. Ford's sharp eyes looked over at Addy and then at Mama. She said, I'll hire you, Mrs. Walker, on a trial basis. $1 a week to start. I run a first-rate shop here. Most of my customers are from Society Hill, and then they'll expect the best. You'll have to do fine work, and I'll expect you to make deliveries. If you can't do the work, I can't keep you on. This is a business, not a charity ward. Yes, ma'am, Mama said. Her voice was soft and steady. All right, then, said Mrs. Ford. I'll take you up on the room where you and your daughter can stay. Addy, Mama, and Mrs. Moore followed Mrs. Moore up 3 flights of steep, dark stairs. At the top was a garret. Addy's heart sank. The room was dirty, stuffy, and hot. It was smaller than the cabin Addy's family had lived back in on the plantation. A table with 2 chairs stood in the middle of the room, and a bed had been pushed into one corner. There was a small stove. Then Addy saw something that made her feel better, a window that looked over the street. Addy's cabin on the plantation had no windows. It's not much, Mrs. Ford said. It's hot in the summer and cold in the winter. It'll be fine, Mama said quickly. She put her arm around Addy's shoulders. We gonna make it a home. And that's the end of that chapter. Let's see. So, a dollar in 1864. So $1 in 1864 would be $20 today. Addy's mom making good money. Well, bye.